And we got that started just then with all of you talking about your work with each other to sort of set the scene. But what we're going to do now is get into a conversation amongst a few guests. And we're going to do that for about 20 minutes, ask a few people to share some perspectives on our big question. And then we're going to open it up to a whole group discussion again, when we're going to invite you all to share questions and share also your insights, your own expertise and knowledge on the topic for today's session. So that topic is from dialogue to momentum. And I think to try and set the scene for that, what we want to explore today is how we work better together with other people. Now, that might be true whether you're a teacher, a school leader, a civil society leader, a community leader, somebody working in policy, trying to work with government, trying to work with a colleague, trying to work with parents more effectively. I think this is a question with relevance probably for everybody in the room, because we know if we want to improve education, we can't do it as individuals, but need to do it together. And so the question we want to ask today is, how do you get from a place of dialogue, where you're talking to somebody, to a place of momentum, where you're doing things together? And it sounds like it should be easy, but I think as we're going to hear from our friends that are joining us for this session, it isn't as easy as all that. So before we get started, we've got a few framing thoughts. So I'll just say I'm Alex Beard. I work at an organisation called Teach for All. We work with organisations in 65 countries around the world on a variety of education reform projects. And I'm based normally in London. And I'm going to hand over now to my co-host Sophia to give some framing thoughts on the session and tell us a bit about her work.
Thank you so much, Alex, and then welcome to Trip. What we do is that we bring together leading social change makers that are working across geographies, across sectors, in different areas of social work. So it's not just limited to education. Education is one of the many areas that our social innovators work upon. And then we've been operating for like 28 years. And for the past 28 years, we've also looked at social innovation across different spectrums. So individual social enterprises. And then we started looking at social innovation, even in public spaces like public social innovation and social innovation in businesses and corporates as well. Then we realized that, over the years, how social change is done is taking a different form, right? The challenges that we are facing are so complex that one individual actor cannot tackle that alone. So there are collective problems that require collective solutions. So we came together to come up with an initiative called Collective Social Innovation, where we are then looking at collective movements, groups that are coming together to work together to be able to tackle these challenges. And then what we're seeing that is interesting is that some of the promising solutions that we've seen, the innovation is not even in the solution, it's actually in how people work together. The innovation is in the collaboration itself. And we brought together a report recently, and one of the quotes that stuck with me, it's saying that humanity's greatest superpower is actually in the way that we work together. So especially in this fragmented world, we would need to learn to work together more. But the challenge too that I wanted to highlight is that it is not as easy as it sounds, right? We say that collective action, collective momentum, but working together is actually more difficult because we have different incentives, we have different power dynamics. So aligning those efforts is actually more difficult. I think, which is why this session is more interested for us, because then we need to think about what are the enablers and barriers that will help people to work together. How do we design spaces like this where different ecosystems can come together to build trust, to be able to work together, to move from not just conversations, but actual momentum, so that, we don't just gather, we talk, we share updates, we go back and then we are working in silos. How do we move from this individual efforts to a more collective effort? So that's just what we are also exploring at the Schwab Foundation. You can look at our latest report on collective social innovation, which we have copies we can share around, but maybe Alice, you can tell us more about what you also do at the Teach for All.
Yeah, so just one further framing thought before we hear from our guests. So when we think about change in education, I think often we think about what can we get our government to do, or what can teachers do? Can we change the curriculum? Can we have a new policy? And our experience at Teach for All over 15 years, we have about 110,000 people working through our education systems in different roles. And learning from them, we realized that that story about change is important, but it's only half the story. We think that in addition to the importance of policies and practices and curriculums, we think the people in the education system really are who make the change happen. If you think about an education system, it's not actually made up of policies and classrooms and school buildings. It's made up of people. It's made up of students and teachers and parents and school leaders and policymakers. And so when we think about change, we're thinking about, well, how do people change and how do they change together? And people, every day when they turn up in school or turn up in their government office, have their motivations and their beliefs and their identities and their relationships and their biases and their stories and their capabilities. And so when we think about change, what we've learned is that we need to think about those two things. On the one hand, the system, the policies, the practices, but on the other hand, the people, and how do we get the people in the system working towards a shared purpose? How do we get the people in the system, when I say people in the system, the students, the teachers, the parents, the school leaders, the policymakers, the businesses, how do we get them to have greater trust and deeper relationships amongst each other? How do we ensure that everybody in the system has more agency to make change happen? And finally, how do we enable people in the system to learn from one another? Because that's the only way our systems will change, if we're all learning, trying things, learning, trying to do them better. So that's why we're going to situate today's conversation more in the people side of change. Even though we're talking about changing education systems, we're going to talk about the people side. So how do we go from talking to people to doing things with them? That's the invite. Sophia, I'm going to hand over to you to hear from our panelists.
Thank you so much. So to get started with the conversation, we have a few of our friends here working on different areas who would then situate this conversation with some fast starters. I'll start with you, Radha. Maybe you can introduce yourself and then you let us know why is it critical for us to build this momentum, particularly in education. And then when you're building this momentum, who are you prioritizing in this process? So maybe you can give some example from your work with Teach for All.
And then should I share something that we're learning about that? All right. Okay. So, hi, everyone. My name is Radha from Teach for All. Alex and I are counterparts. And I get the privilege of working with people across the system. So teachers, school leaders, policy leaders, heads of civil society organizations. And I think, what Alex said is systems change with people. Like, that's what I've really realized, because when you're working across these different people, actually some of the challenges are very human challenges. They're the same, whether it's a student or, sometimes even a CEO of an organization. What we sometimes don't realize is we're actually all human beings and we're struggling with similar things. And so what I've come to believe is we are not going to do anything with any one of us alone, because we only see our part of things. But a lot of the work I do is around what do we do when we get stuck? Because we're operating in systems where there's so much pressure. Like here we're talking about working together, which is building bridges, and all our incentive systems are like climbing ladders. You are a teacher and you're incentivized for one thing, but you want to work with parents and students, but you're measured on this. Same thing with the leader of a civil society organization. I just spoke to someone yesterday, she said, all I want to do is create space for people to come together, but my survival is based on a program that's gonna get funded in a specific way. So we're all struggling with these external pressures. So what I've come to believe is that if we want to have that external change, it has to start with the internal change. And I'll just share two things that I do with leaders around that internal change. The one is, how do you stay connected to purpose under pressure? So I think everybody here wants the best for kids, right? Like this is why we're here. And so that is purpose. But I don't think we're having the conversation about what happens under pressure. And we're all facing that pressure. So one very practical thing I've seen is, and we were just speaking about this right now, is create small communities of people where you can actually talk about what's challenging, what are your fears, what's hard, and then have a second conversation is, given all of that, what have you managed to do? And I've seen groups of teachers come together around the world and have that conversation. Groups of CEOs, even philanthropists, are starting to say, this is what I'm struggling with, but despite that, this is what I've done. And what I love about that collective is one day you're down, but somebody else in your situation has broken through something, and that gives you a bit of inspiration. So my encouragement is that if you don't have that space, go create it. Start with 2 or 3 people. So that's one thing. The second thing that I've seen is, I don't know, somehow we've lost our way. We've become like, I grew up and it's all about community, but then we're in this work and we get focused on me versus we, and I think it's just because we're afraid sometimes. So the second thing that I've learned is the number one thing we can do when we're working with others is when we disagree, which is hard, the thing that we want to do is harden our hearts, protect ourselves, come back to our people. I think the courageous thing to do is soften your heart. And when you soften your heart, you start asking different questions. It's like a parent with a teacher, if there's an antagonistic relationship, or civil society with a government. When you soften your heart, you start asking questions like, wait, what are they afraid of? What do they need? Instead of what can I get for them? What can I give? And when you start just asking those questions in different ways, this is when I've seen real partnerships between unlikely people. And it takes some courage. It takes some courage because we've got some fear. So I think that's the second thing is we have to almost build our capacity to be in relationship and build that skill like anything else. And I've seen if just one person softens their heart just a little, like asks a different question, then something can shift. So those are some of the things that I've seen work and I'm thinking about, and it's challenging, but yeah, it starts with each of us.
Thank you, Radha. So maybe you could also make some notes if there are some questions that you have for our panelists. We'll have time for that. But we'll get to Vikram, maybe from your work with skill as well.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Vikram Bhatt, and I am not going to talk about scale. I will talk about my journey a little bit. Very quickly, I was 10 years, I was a corporate slave. Then I was a teacher, a school principal. I worked in non-profit leadership for some time, worked with the Delhi government for 5 years, and today I'm running an organization. So that's my journey. So I've had all these different experiences from which I'm going to speak. So my first question is, how many of you have read this book called The Little Prince? Excellent. Some people have. So one of the most important lessons in that book is that we largely, when adults talk to children, they bore them. We talk to them about things that they don't understand, and we talk to them about adult things. What's the weather's so much, politics, this, that. But I'm going to demonstrate this. Young man, do you use English or Hindi or Kannada? English? Okay. What is your name? Siddharth? Okay, Siddharth, yeah. Sit comfortably. Siddharth, I want to ask you one question, okay? Tell me one really good thing about school. Yeah, you want to? I'll get.
One thing he likes or one thing about food?
One thing he likes most.
One thing you like most about
There are many friends in school.
You've set me up well. Thank you. You're almost like a plant. Fantastic. So what my invitation is, and so if I'd ask Siddharth, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a boring question for Siddharth. But what do you like about school? It's his friends, sure. Then I ask you, what was the last fight you had with your friend? I think he might like answering that question. Right? So I'm just saying that the invitation that comes from The Little Prince is that I think in the work we do, we often forget to build on what Radha was saying, the human in front of us. And so this is an important lesson. I think this is something I've internalized, is that when adults meet adults and you don't know them very well, you're almost meeting a child. There's no context to your interaction, and you have to frame it as if you would have met a child. And for that, you have to see how two children interact and try and mimic that a little bit. So the first question you should ask is, hey, what's your favorite ice cream? Which I think that creates a space for softness, I think. Otherwise, very often we're like, oh my God, this big systems thinking, orchestration, these words that we start with, and we often don't leave any room for softness. So my invitation is in the work we do. And once you build that relationship, and it's true with children too, if I get to know Siddharth, I'm pretty sure in 3 or 4 meetings, he'll tell me what he wants to be when he grows up. But he won't tell me today, or he'll make up some answer. And the idea is that when we meet adults, particularly in a context where we want to do something together, we forget that to align, we almost must come from a place of truth that children inhabit naturally. So if we can find something like that, I think that would work. Yeah, that's my invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vikram. We'll go to Samuel.
Thank you, Sophia. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam. I'm from Malaysia. So I lead an organization in Malaysia that works with all things education leadership, from classrooms to systems. But I think at the core of the work that I do comes from classrooms and communities. I had the utmost privilege and honor to work with the indigenous communities in Malaysia. They are called the Orang Asli, so they live in the rainforest of Malaysia. And that 10 years of spending time with them really taught me a lot of things. So when this question was posed, I think one incident came to mind. So in the formative years of me teaching in that school, we started involving parents, right, in the classrooms, to get them to teach together, to get them to contribute to whatever that we were doing in the school. However, there is this saying in the community, right? I'll say it in the local language. It's called Adat Sayed, Adat Sayed, right? Adat Sayed. So what we were led to believe was that Adat Sayed meant that parents of Orang Asli communities will give in to their children at all cost. So for example, school attendance is one of the biggest problems, and dropout rates are really, really high. So one of the things that we usually do is we go door to door and try to talk to parents and get them to send their kids to school. And the answer that we usually get was that, so we'll just ask them, like, why don't you send your kids to school? And the parents will just say, because they don't want to. And that's the end of the conversation. So in the first 3 years, I was led to believe, based on the people around me, that Adat Sayed meant the parents didn't care. But as soon as we started creating spaces for parents to contribute, I think the agency emerged. Agency was already within them. They felt more comfortable in being more critical in the work that we were doing. And I remember very distinctly in one of the meetings that we had like this together with community members, a mother stood up and said, and basically challenged our thinking about that philosophy or that value, Adat Sayed philosophy. And she said, you think, right, that Adat Sayed means we give in to our children. But actually, Adat Sayed means we prioritize our children. And that our children, whatever that they want, whatever that they need, must be prioritized. And that aha moment was like a slap across all of our faces after 4 years of doing it. And my point is that spaces like this creates the opportunity for us to challenge existing way of doing things. It was very comfortable for me to immediately accept that Adat Sayed meant the parents didn't care, so we needed to do everything else. And we were doing it, right? We were immediately on the ground, creating interventions, going bang, 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 trying to increase their motivation, trying to make sure that they wanted to send their kids to school. But what we lost in that entire process, because we did not provide that space, we did not give them the opportunity to pause, ourselves to pause, is that lack of criticalness in whatever that we were doing. So yeah, I think echoing what both of them have been saying is the children. It provides everybody in the community, when spaces like this provides people in the community a voice to challenge what we are doing, and that was our biggest aha moment. And for me, that moment and many moments after that really spurred us to create momentum in whatever that we were doing. So it was very intentional. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. I think I want to have some provocations, and then I'll hand over to my co-host, Alex. You've mentioned, the different stakeholders that you engage, and then maybe you can also let us know what is the biggest challenge right now, some practical challenges that you face that is pulling you back from, those conversations to momentum. Maybe you can give us specific instances in your work, and then we can hear also from.
Yeah. I'm just going to be very honest. It's just ego. Yeah, we all have this fixed idea of how things would work. It's also about power. It's also about control. It's also about it being comfortable. Doing it together with many others is very uncomfortable. There's going to be a lot of uncomfortable conversations, and we need to be okay with that. And I think, especially in the civil society space, we are so accustomed to doing it in that particular manner. And when we invite somebody else in, we make everything difficult. And when it becomes difficult, human nature, as we all know, we will lean towards the easier way of doing things. But I think ultimately is that ego part of things. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come at it from a very personal space. What's a barrier or a challenge that you use your provocation? I think I just wish I was a little more aware of how powerful conditioning is, and it's it's Sam's point about ego, and I think it manifests in all of us. And I think when I was younger, and I wish there were ways and spaces for me to at least be more aware that conditioning means something. Like, so if I watch TV, which is what our addiction was when I was a young child, if I watch TV for 3 hours straight, it does something to my brain versus reading a book versus, and those kinds of conditioning aspects were lost. And that is, in a sense, my deepest worry for humankind. I think where it's become even less, people are even less aware of it versus more, and I feel like that.
One of the challenges I see is that somehow we've got in this space of what's not working. Like you look at the media and it's what's not working. You're in spaces like maybe not this one, but so many spaces. What's not working? You're talking about your colleagues. What's not working? You're talking about your in-laws. What's not working? Right? We've got so used to that it's become part of the collective dialogue. And so I just believe it's almost like the collective energy is picking that up. And so this is again another one of those conditionings, because then you just become part of it and you're almost unaware of it. Yesterday I was out in the communities and we met this block officer, and he said, the kids in my school, it's typical public school, they're doing so well, but we never talk about them. We never talk about the stories. Like all you hear is what's not working. And so I know we're talking about problems, but I'm going to give the antidote to this one. Actually, I think there is something simple. Like if every single one of us could go and actually for 30 seconds say something that's working, or every single day go up to someone and say, I noticed you did this. Wow, that made a difference for me. Something specific. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. It can literally change their belief in themselves. And I can tell you, it actually gives you something too. So just these micro acknowledgements, I think, can disrupt this idea of what's not working. Like, let's start shifting it to talking about what's working and build on that. Yeah.
I'm gonna borrow that as our prompt for the next thing. So what we're going to try and do now is open this up to a whole group discussion for about 15, 20 minutes. But This is an old teacher thing, right? Before we go to the group discussion, I'm just going to give everybody a chance to talk to the person next to them for 3 minutes to kind of get the juices flowing a little bit. So the first prompt is, we've had some pretty personal situations shared here about individual relationships. We all have those in our lives, about personal perspectives. So in your own work, whatever it might be, or in your own life, what's one thing that's working for you in your effort to go from dialogue to momentum? And what's one challenge that you're dealing with right now? And then we might turn the challenges into questions as part of the discussion, but also if you have questions for our panelists, think of those. But for the discussion, 3 minutes, what's one thing that's working for you? And what's one challenge you're facing in your own efforts to go from dialogue to momentum? We'll come back in 3 minutes. So over to
But I've got it, right? I believe.
Okay, guys. 1 more minute. 1 more minute. 1 minute to go. Okay, thanks everybody. And I'm sorry to interrupt this conversation. I said 3 minutes. It was 6 minutes in the end because you looked like you were really enjoying yourself. I'm going to ask guests to stay where they are at this bit. So we're going to try and have now, from a small group to a whole group, conversation about this same topic. So in your conversations, you may have shared something, a win, a victory, or a challenge that you would like to share with the whole group. Now's your chance to do so. You may also have heard something that somebody else said that you would like the rest of the group to hear. Now's your chance to share that. Or you might have a question for one of our guests who spoke earlier. This is also your chance to do that. But if you have something you would like to say, just put your hand up. I'll bring you the mic and you can bring your voice into this space. Now, the first person to go will break the seal. So who's feeling especially brave?
I think my question is to you. Um, so you mentioned that incentive or recognition is in one direction, and the what we actually have to do is another layer. And I'm trying to figure out, and I would like your help to understand how we can intentionally align these two in one direction. Is it even possible? Even in the classroom, score better, learn faster. I think we are not giving them spaces to collaborate. We are not giving any award for that. And that same thing replicates in the society that we are moving ahead.
I can share it, but I'm sure many others have kind of grappled with this. So if anyone else has any thoughts, I mean, I think it comes down to where did he go? He was sharing where Vikram was sharing about with socialized beliefs. And so the first thing is unlearning, like unlearning and actually like coming to the what do I really believe and what do I want? And is this the system that I believe in and I want? And the thing that I found, again, that helps me with that is it takes courage to go against something that's different. And so I've just found community. Like I've actually found community to say, actually, like this doesn't really work. And then the last thing I'll say is when you find community, then you start realizing like you can do a little bit of both. Eventually you go down your own path. But yes, I can figure out a way to make this work. And you know what? I am going to do something creative and have the kids work together. And you just start having the courage to do that. So, yeah, I would just say you're not alone. Don't try to do it alone. And then just start trying little things, 1% different in the direction that you want to go in. And that's how things get started.
So thank you. I'm Prakash. So working as an wildlife educator at Center for Wildlife Studies. So one thing I agree with Malini madam. So she was discussing about they were helping women. So getting some economically well in the society. So they are not depending on their peoples who are actually drunkards. So I was just connecting with our situations where in rural areas, in and around the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, the fathers of the school children were sometimes peoples of addicted to drinking, and sometimes they might also face a human wildlife conflict, and they directly go in chasing wildlife, and then they lost their life. So they couldn't able to support their kids in their education. So that is one of the greatest challenges we do have, and those kids used to share the scenario with us. So that is what this space has given us to share their experience so that we could understand one another better, so overcome the challenges. So that's what I have to share here. Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Siddharth. I'm from government school, grade 7, student of Teach for India. Like in many schools, people think sports is nothing, it's just a game. But we started Project Udan giving chance to every child to play sports and improve their skills. Not only playing sports, we are learning some values in the sports or game, coco even, and every student started coming to school to play sports in ground, and it is the victory to us to come to school, and they improved in studies also, educations. They started answering in classes. It's like the problem is parents think like not leaving them to play sports. They're telling sports is waste, there is no career, but it's not true. Like we should be in sports also. It will be help us mentally and physically. We can learn so many values out. That's it.
Hi, I'm Rashi from Involve. I work in the founder's office at Involve. While I was talking with, sorry, Vidya, um, I realized there's something that I've been grappling with for a while when it comes to momentum and collective action, because at Involve, this is something that's been very topical to us and our vision for the long term. Um, and something that I keep questioning is when you're talking about dialogue to momentum, do we want to focus on the process or do we want to focus on the outcome? Where is it that we want to put our efforts in? Because my role currently, I'm speaking to multiple different kinds of stakeholders. I'm speaking to funders, HNIs, I'm speaking to teachers, I'm speaking to students directly, other organizations in the ecosystem. And I'm creating these threads of narratives that are streamlined for each stakeholder. And they're getting to that same outcome, that same vision that I believe in, that has turned into a mission maybe for me, which I think can turn into collective action as an organization as well. But does that necessarily have to look the same for everybody else that I am trying to rope into this? Or are we looking at it, we could be, because when we speak about collective leadership as well, sure, it's democratic in a way. It's very decentralized, and you're creating a vision together, and that's sort of the point of it. But in the social sector, everybody has a personal story. You're coming with your own vision as well, and you're bringing that to the table, and you have an outcome in mind for that. So as somebody who's relatively newer to the sector, I always wonder in these conversations, am I to focus on the processes, making sure that all these stakeholders are aligned, that they all want the same sort of process to get to the outcome, or do I only focus on the outcome? So means to an end in itself. Yeah, that's something that I'm just grappling with still.
Would anybody like to respond to that or to add something else?
Thank you. I don't know if this will exactly answer your question, but there's just a thought. So I'm Shama from Kshetra Foundation for Dialogue, and this is pretty much what we do, like bringing together different stakeholders and engaging them in effective dialogue, creating that dialogic culture and having certain standards for seeing how effective the dialogue has been and all of those things. So in this whole battle of process and outcome to process, from my experience of working with dialogue, I think it's a lot in the process before that momentum even starts, right? So while we are talking about from dialogue to momentum, I think there should be more value and more time and more investment into the dialogue before the momentum. Like, what exactly does the dialogue before the momentum looks like? And that's where the outcome gets co-created. And even if it changes, how does the momentum keep its course while also navigating the change is what we are looking at. So if that co-creation is built before, I think the outcome can be A today, it can be A1 tomorrow, it can be A2 tomorrow, or B, C, D, or anything tomorrow. And the process will also change accordingly. But what matters is there is another P over there, people. Right? How do the people collaboratively move towards these varied outcomes and add people along these varied outcomes? So I think in a very work-biased and self-biased opinion, I would say that I would give more value and weightage to that dialogue before that momentum even starts and before that outcome has even been decided.
Hi. So actually, during the 3-minute or 6-minute dialogue that we had, there was an insight that occurred to me. So I was having a conversation with Setuji from Prava, and my name's Rohan. I come from Param Foundation. And there was like an interesting similarity I noticed in our conversation when it came to challenges. So in my line of work, we mostly work with kids. In her line of work, she works with youth. And the challenge was for me, it was to understand what kids today require in the field of education. And for her, it was to understand what the youth require when it comes to empowerment. So when I was, just thinking about that, the thought that occurred, or the insight that occurred, was understanding that a lot of the societal conditioning has also separated us across age groups. Like kids go to one place, adults go to one place, different professions go to different place, and we've never really had a common space where people across the different age groups sit together and really intensely try and understand each other. So that was something that just occurred to me, that how important it is to have a dialogue across different age groups, so that we actually get to know what kids today need, what the future generations need, what was happening in the other generations before us. We need information on all that.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kamath. I work with the Bosch India Foundation. Based on experiences we have gone through working in the space of education across the entire spectrum of stakeholders, it's very critical for anybody who is working in the space of education to recognize the urge in every individual to be considered as an individual worth his place. As a system, we have not learned talking to parents, talking to the larger community. Every person of the community would like to participate, would like to contribute to the process of education. They're standing away, they're in their places, expecting people to reach out to them, people to talk to them. And we, people who are educated, who presume to be experienced in the space of education, having tried n number of things, and we have at the back of our mind notions which we have probably subconsciously harbored, that we have understood that we know things, and people who are outside the system, probably they may not be able to contribute. It's not like that. Everyone wants to contribute, and they would have some or the other capability. It may not be the same capability with which you would contribute. They will have their own unique capabilities. Do we have that heart, that humane outlook to reach out, to include, involve, and intend to dialogue? I think this is how probably we should look at. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, myself Lokesh. I'm a Teach for India teacher. I teach in a government school. I'm his teacher. I mean, so there was this one thing. I really connect to what Sir was saying, and I also strongly feel we come from a place. So basically, every individual who is in a social sector tries to come up with a problem to solve in the sector. When they come with to solve the problem, they already think they know everything. And on top of all this, one thing always most of the, I wouldn't say fail, most of the problems go down, most of the foundations doesn't click because they doesn't go out to, they wouldn't have given a chance to hear out from the people. One thing I would have seen from the last 6 months when I was working for a project called, as a Be the Change project under Teach for India, the one important thing I always noticed is the more you hear out to the people around you, the more your problems are solved. The more you easily get solutions. Instead of you sitting in a closed room, sitting just talking to 4 people, instead of that, what's your problem? Who is the main stakeholder there? You go to them, you talk, not just to one person, that you can talk to the across community. Even when it comes to the education field, most of the society thinks when it comes to a student's learning, teacher is the only one that is linked. No, that's not the real truth. for one student to grow, it's the teacher linked to him, friends linked to him, communities linked to him, parents are linked to him, and then the school linked to him. That's how the full circle works. But most of the people are in the dilemma that no, I mean at the end, I just want you to say, it's all how much we hear out to the people. The more you sit and talk to the people, you understand from where these all situations are coming from. That's what I strongly feel.
We'll just do two more.
Hi, I'm Gayatri. I'm working in Vidyavide Foundation. I want us to take our idea about friendship to a different level when we talk about dialogue. I remember talking to one of the teachers in rural Chhattisgarh where I was working with. When we talk about change, we think about two levels, right? Mindset level and behavior level shift that we see in a person who is working. So when we talk to him, he is very ready to do a lot of things in the classroom. He has a lot of ideas. He has a lot of pedagogical tools in place. But somehow when he comes and stands in front of the students, he's not able to translate it into action. So there was a huge gap in between his mindset, that the dialogues he has in himself, but that not coming into momentum or the action. And then when we were having conversation, he said that I feel a lot lonely in my job. I don't have friends to talk to with whom I can dialogue and discuss about what I want to do. And when I'm with my friends who are teachers, I do wonderful things. We think about a lot of things, and when we stand together, when we work together, we bring in a lot of change to the people whom we are working with. That's when I also realized that when we create intentional spaces, it's also important that we think about friendship as a core value to drive dialogues, because like he said that the one thing that he remembers in school is his friends. It's like when a lot of friends come together, the momentum that can come in will be very different from people who have like the conversation that we had today morning, selfishness. A lot of selfishness can lead to selflessness. A lot of friends come together can also lead to a selfless movement or momentum, is what I think.
I'm not directly in the education sector. I work as a coach and a facilitator, and I actually have a question around the challenge you mentioned around egos, right? So we recognize that people need to come together and we need to hear people out. What I've seen in my work is that the person in power, mostly, if they are coming from an egoic space, which is very often, you can have all these spaces where people are being heard. And I do a lot of these hearing interventions, culture interventions, right? And people speak a lot about what's working, not working. But then what happens when you then, have to share it with the person in charge who actually doesn't want to hear these things about themselves and doesn't want to make the change? So then we're like, that's the bottleneck that at least I see often again and again and again. And so I find that, just any thoughts around dealing with ego?
So we're going to have to wrap up, but I recommend that you two talk to each other in a second. But apologies, we only have a few minutes to go. We can carry on talking, obviously, past the end of the session, but I want to keep us on time. So I'm going to ask, by way of closing, each of our invited guests to share a closing thought. And I wonder if it can be a bit in the spirit of this question. So, in my work, over the years, I feel like I've shifted from this position of thinking that learning is about telling to learning is about asking. And this kind of scenario that we've had today is how we like to do things at Teach for All. Like, rather than sort of, finding out what we know and then publishing it and disseminating it around, we believe in groups coming together to share their collective wisdom, their experiences. And we believe that that's the most important knowledge and insight and experience and expertise and wisdom that we can draw on in our works. So I love that we've had the chance to talk to each other, hear from one another's perspectives. And we've heard some really powerful thoughts from different people in the room. And that's how we're going to learn our way forward in this work together, by talking to one another and listening to one another. But, as we heard in this final question, and I think has been implied in some of the other things, sometimes in this work, we come up against things that might feel like conflict or disagreement or ego. You're trying to embed sports, but parents don't value it. You want to, have education in the wild, but not everybody's signed up. So at some point, we're going to need to convince people who are in power, have power, move people that don't agree with us. So by way of a closing thought, I'm going to ask each of our guests for a sort of top tip or a final reflection on what each of us can do to overcome some of those challenges, make even more momentum in our work. So we'll hear from each of them and then close out.
So, Alex, I think from what everybody has been saying, we can all agree that there is power in doing things together, whether it's from speaking about it and then that being translated into action. But from what I've seen and what I've experienced, we've been involved in a lot of talks over the years. And talking is relatively easy. It's very low risk. The highest risk is to translate that into action. And from collective initiative that I've seen work, there's always this one thing that they have in common, is that everybody needs to be willing to sacrifice something. From philanthropy, are you sacrificing, for example, or CSOs, are you sacrificing your time? Because it's going to take significantly longer to develop something when you're involving a lot of conversations into it. Are you going to sacrifice your autonomy? And also for larger organizations, are you going to sacrifice your control over things? And are you also going to sacrifice money and time and all of that? So I think as I'm reflecting actively on this and in collectives that I've been part of that has worked, there's always been that one thing that you have to say, I'm willing to let go of this part. And then it will work. If everybody is very headstrong on what they believe and how they want to do things alone, it's so much easier. The risk is very low. You can design it today, execute it tomorrow. By the end of the year, kids will learn. But at the scale that we are looking at, the systems that we want to change, it will not work that way. So I'll end with, what are you willing to sacrifice? Thanks, Alex.
I'm actually just curious to ask all of you this question, so I'm more interested in your answers around this. But I think, I think with collectives, it takes all of us, and it only takes one of us to start, right? And so I always think about the we, and then the me in the we. And so the main thing I think about is each of us have something to give to a collective. Like some have the humility to listen. Others have the ability to organize. Others have the ability to say, that voice was not heard. I'm going to stand up and actually invite someone in. And so I guess my final invitation is think about what is it that you can uniquely offer, and then just start doing that 1% more every day. That's it, right? So if you can organize, go organize 3 people and have a conversation. If you stand for something, take 1% more risk to do that one more time. Because I think if each of us lean into what we can offer, then actually that's when the collective starts working. Yeah.
Everyone felt that the other person's job in the batting order was much easier. Because he felt like the openers felt, the ball is new, so it's hard for me to bat. The people who were batting later in the order felt, the openers get so much more time to settle and then bat, so their job is easier. So he came up with a very simple idea, which was just he kept switching up the batting orders. So you would have to keep batting in positions that were not your preferred or weren't. Okay, he said that you want to open, let me put you there, the old curse, may you get what you want. So, and the point of it is people stopped complaining and they adjusted to their batting orders. But the larger point I was trying to make, which is my invitation to all of you, and particularly if you're in a space of dialogue where there may be conflict, which is, as pointed out by Sam and the others, ego-driven, find a way to let them experience your reality and commit to experiencing theirs. So go walk a mile in their shoes. It could be an hour, it could be 2 hours. Just experience their reality viscerally, like really, not in conversation, and give them a chance to authentically experience yours. I'm willing to bet things would change.
I just wanted to say that, yeah, there are lots of sources for continuing to learn together about this topic. Of course, there are the peers that you have in this room, the organizations here, organizations like the Schwab Foundation or Teach for All. We have a global institute with lots of virtual opportunities for learning about systems, about relationships, about how you make change happen. I would invite anybody here who's interested to, find the website, look out for those. They're all kind of open source, all fully available. But of course, it's also very easy to, turn and talk to that friend of yours or that person that you know, or a peer or a mentor. And I would really encourage everyone to continue doing that. Like the greatest wisdom is in the people doing the work every day in the classroom, schools, systems, communities, countries, neighborhoods. So keep connecting, keep talking, keep learning, keep sharing. The wisdom is inside each of us. But thank you all for your active participation and for making this session really great. I've learned a lot. And thank you to our three panelists, to Vikram and Sam and Radha. Thanks, Sophia. Thanks to the Shikshagraha crew for having us. Thanks, Aishwarya, for organizing everything. And it's been a great hour. Really appreciate it. Thank you all.